NFL Draft Day is tomorrow. The long awaited and highly anticipated NFL offseason event is ready to get underway. And today, with 24 hours left to go until the NFL draft officially kicks off, we're going to go over the Detroit Lions' final big board for 2025. Now, we have a small big board for the first, second, and third rounds of the NFL draft, alongside with early day 3 and late day 3 prospects to keep an eye on. And today we're going to talk about all of them, give you different players at every range of the NFL draft, talk about what players may be targeted with each and every Detroit Lions selection to give you as much information as possible to know these prospects the best that you can. Today, we're going to go over every big prospect the Detroit Lions have been rumored to, linked to, and put them on a big board for your entertainment. So, with that being said, let's kick off with the first round of the NFL draft, where I have 11 prospects. Now, of course, these can change if the Detroit Lions trade up, trade back. Not every one of these prospects will be there, but some of them absolutely will be. And this is my big board for the first round. Mike Green, led FBS in sacks a year ago, coming out of Marshall, does have some questionable character concerns. The sources are a little bit spotty, and obviously he says that it's not a large deal. If the Detroit Lions come back and they say that the character concerns aren't an issue, I could absolutely see Mike Green being a Detroit Lion. He is a fantastic pass rusher, a good run defender, so incredibly fluid and able to get around the edge. And of course, with 17 and a half sacks a season ago, he is a player to absolutely keep your eye on. And in my opinion, is the best prospect on the Detroit Lions big board. Obviously, there are players like Abdul Carter. There are players much higher in the draft that will be taken higher. But when you're talking about realistic prospects for pick 28, I think Mike Green is far and away the best player at his position. And I think he will be the perfect fit for Detroit if he is able to be selected. I think very similar things about Jaheed Campbell. Reminds me a lot of Micah Parsons. And if you want to hear about that, there is another video on the channel from a few weeks ago talking about exactly that. I think he is incredibly similar to Micah Parsons from an athletic profile, from a production profile. And honestly, I think if Alabama were to play him as a primary edge rusher, he may have led college football in sacks. He is so fluid. He is so good around the edge. He bends incredibly well, has a great first step. And even though he's not the most powerful player, he makes up for that with just his elite ability to get around tackles and to get around guards. He's a great blitzer from the off-ball position. He can cover. He's extremely athletic, a little bit raw, much like Micah Parsons was coming out of Penn State. But overall, I think he is a fantastic player for the Detroit Lions. And if he's there at 28, I think the pick will be on the clock for maybe 25 seconds before they select the linebacker from Alabama. James Pierce Jr., edge rusher from Tennessee, I think is the second best option at edge. 6'5", 245 pounds, the prototypical size that the Detroit Lions really like at edge rusher. This time last season was being talked about as the potential #1 overall pick in the next draft class. Hasn't quite lived up to that. I thought his pass rushing was really similar to what he saw as a sophomore, but I thought his run defending was significantly improved from where it was a year ago. He is a player that is improved drastically, maybe not on the stat sheet, but on the tape and on the film that was watched. And I think he's a great, well-rounded player. Reminds me a lot of Kayvon Thibodeau. And if you can get a player like Kayvon Thibodeau to get you 10, 11 sacks as a 28th overall pick, I think that's phenomenal. Even if he comes into year one and gets you 6 to 7 sacks as a rookie, I think that is fantastic value. I think he still has room to grow. He's a fantastic athlete, has great length, has a good motor, doesn't give up on the play. Even though run defending isn't his strength, he improved drastically at it a year ago at Tennessee. And I think that it's something that shows up on tape, shows up that it was something he really tried to work on and improve. And I thought successfully did so last season. And there's no reason if he puts on just a little bit more weight, he couldn't improve and take another step in that category as well. Walter Nolan, defensive tackle from Ole Miss, I think is a Jalen Carter light-esque player. He's not as polished as Jalen Carter. He's not as talented as Jalen Carter, but from a play style perspective and at a ceiling, I think he could turn into Jalen Carter. He has all the prototypical tools you want in a defensive tackle. He's quick off the line, has good hands, has good power, is a great run defender, is just a chaos creator in the backfield, and is great at disrupting the quarterback, getting them off their spot, and just overall being a really big nuisance on the defensive line. If he's at 28 and the edge rushers are gone, I think addressing the defensive line is still a big deal for the Lions. Of course, with Aleem McNeil not being back until maybe early November and DJ Reader being on the final year of his contract, adding some talent at defensive tackle is a necessity at some point in the draft. And if Walter Nolan is there, it could be at 28. Gray Zabel's a player I think is really good at guard. I think he's just a big Detroit Lions type of player, 6'6", 305 pounds, great run blocker, strong pass protector, fits the Detroit Lions mold as far as just tough, gritty, mean player on the offensive line. And I think he'd fit perfectly in between Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow. Kenneth Grant from Michigan, I think, is a great defensive tackle, more of a nose tackle prospect than a true pass rusher. But with DJ Reader being on the final year of his contract, they do need to fill that position sooner rather than later. So Kenneth Grant could be there as well. Jalen Walker, linebacker from Georgia, very similarly to a guy like Jaheed Campbell. I just think he is a little bit lesser of a prospect. I think he's not quite as good of a pass rusher. I think he's a little bit more developed as a off-ball linebacker, but he could still rush the passer from the edge rusher position. I still think he's a phenomenal player. If he's there at 28, I think there's a good chance the Lions take him. But again, just a step behind some guys like Jaheed Campbell, Kenneth Grant, and some of the other players we've talked about. Mykel Williams is in a similar boat. I think that he had big aspirations and big expectations this year at Georgia and never quite lived up to them. He's a player with great length, with great measurables, a great athlete, and reminds me quite a bit of Travon Walker when he was coming out of Georgia, where the production wasn't there, but the tape looks really good. I'm a big believer that numbers do not lie, and I think that there's a reason Mykel Williams wasn't quite able to get home as often as he potentially could have. But again, Travon Walker developed into a 10.5 sack player in Jacksonville. If you could get that in year 2 or 3 of Mykel Williams from Georgia, I think that's a well-spent pick at 28. And then you guys like Tyler Booker from Alabama, Derek Harmon from Oregon, and Donovan Jackson, players that I think are maybe closer to second round prospects to late day one guys, players that I do believe will be there for the Detroit Lions, but just not as exciting. I don't think quite as impactful as some of the other guys we talked about earlier. But any of these players in the first round, I think, are good picks for the Detroit Lions. It makes them better immediately, addresses a big need. And I do think we will see either a defensive or offensive lineman. I think trenches are very much in play for the first round. And that is where I would expect the Detroit Lions to go. Moving on to the second round, it gets a little bit more exciting for the skill positions. Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts, two secondary members from Notre Dame, who very well may be gone by 60. Benjamin Morrison, in my opinion, could go easily within the top 15 to 20 picks. But with the injury concerns to both of these players, their draft stock has fallen. If Benjamin Morrison somehow makes it to pick 60, there is no way the Detroit Lions pass on him. He is a Detroit Lions cornerback. Big, physical, press man corner that is great ball hawking ability, takes the football away in space. And if you could add him to a secondary of Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, you'd have one of the best young secondaries in all of football. And I think that'd be really tough for the Lions to pass up. Xavier Watts is a player that I even think is in play at 28. In my opinion, the best safety instincts in the class. Maybe not the best athlete, but takes the football away, is always in the right spot to succeed, and is a player I believe will be incredibly impactful in the NFL. Notre Dame safeties tend to work out. They just have great instincts, great playmaking ability. And I think Xavier Watts will be the next link in that lineage of great Notre Dame safeties to the NFL. JT Tuimoloau is a player that I think is really good out of Ohio State. Same with Landon Jackson. They're both great run defenders, good pass rushers, high motor, good athletes, prototypical size, and they fill very similar roles. So I'll talk about them in the same vein. I think both of them are power over finesse. I think both of them are excellent run defenders and edge setters. They both, again, have that great size, and just overall, I think are really good options if they are available at 60, especially if the Lions go with a player like Jaheed Campbell or Walter Nolan or Gray Zabel in the first round and they don't get that edge rusher. I think both Landon Jackson and JT Tuimoloau are at the top of that edge rusher 2 group. They're at the top of that tier 2 of player, and I think they'd be really, really well versed to get those guys. Josiah Stewart's a little bit different of a prospect. I think he's more of a pass rusher than a run defender. The Lions have visited with him 4 separate times this offseason, including the Combine, his Pro Day, and a top 30 visit. He is a player they are very clearly interested in, and I think if he's available in the second or even the third round, I do think he will be a Detroit Lion. I think he's a better pass rusher than maybe Landon Jackson, but maybe not quite as good of a run defender, so it just depends what they want there. Trey Harris Wide receiver from Ole Miss is a player I could absolutely see the Lions going after. 6'3", prototypical size, good speed, good athleticism for the wide receiver position. Could potentially be a guy that they want to replace and kind of put in that X position, moving obviously St. Brown to the slot. Jameson is the Z, and having a really good long-term solution to what Tim Patrick is doing right now. Tim Patrick's on a one-year deal. He's getting a little bit older. And while I think Tim Patrick is great, I think Trey Harris could potentially come in and be a long-term supplement for a guy like Tim Patrick and be there for 3 to 4 seasons as a really good wide receiver option. Carson Schwessinger from UCLA, linebacker. The Lions have shown a lot of interest in him throughout the preseason and throughout the offseason. Wouldn't be surprised if they take him in the second round, as well as Thomas from Florida State. Good press man corner and a great player and a great fit for the Detroit Lions. Secondary isn't really the biggest need, but I could potentially see it being an option for them at some point in the draft. And, if a player like AZ Thomas falls, I think you could potentially see him being in play for the Lions. Princely Emmanuelian is a player that from Ole Miss, edge rusher, good production, good size, has been linked to the Detroit Lions as well. I think could be a good pass rusher for them. Isn't quite as good of a run defender, but you have guys like Josh Paschal in the building for the pass rush and for the run stopping. I think more of a pass rushing specialist like Princely Emmanuelian is a player that could fit what the Detroit Lions need. They need to get to the quarterback, and Princely can absolutely do that. TJ Sanders and Darius Alexander are two defensive tackles that are very different. TJ Sanders is more of a run stopper, while Darius Alexander is a pass rusher. But I think both of them could be good options at defensive tackle in the second round, as is Alfred Collins and Kyle Kennard. Kyle Kennard being the edge rusher from South Carolina. He was really solid this year. 6'5", 225 pounds, a little bit on the lighter side for an edge rusher, but has good bend, gets around the edge really well, and just is a player that consistently gets to the quarterback. I think is one of more the underrated edge rushers in this class, and a player that could make some noise on day two, a player that could be really impactful immediately for the Lions, and a guy that, again, if you go offensive lineman, if you go defensive tackle, if you go linebacker in the first round, I think he's a guy that you can come back around to, swing at pick 60, and feel pretty confident of his floor, as well as his ability to develop into a really solid pass rusher. With the third round, I think there are a couple of players here that could be really impactful early, but are more depth guys at this point. Malachi Moore from Alabama is a player that I am incredibly high on. I think he is versatile. I think he has great instincts, great ball production, and is a player that at one point was talked about as a top 10 to 15 pick a few seasons ago. Stayed at Alabama a bit longer than most people expected. Was still good for the Crimson Tide, but wasn't nearly as good as his predecessors of like Bryant Branch and Minkah Fitzpatrick. So he is going to fall probably somewhere to the late day 2, maybe even early day 3. But if the Detroit Lions can snag him at 102, make him the third safety, make him a backup slot cornerback, I think that's fantastic value. Jack Sawyer from Ohio State had first round buzz for a little while, but it kind of fell off after the NFL Combine. Was super productive through the college football playoff, was a big reason as to why Ohio State won that national championship, but I think lacks a little bit of power, lacks a little bit of bend. I think is limited with his athleticism and his build. But in the third round at pick 102 with a compensatory pick, you could do a lot worse than a player like Jack Sawyer. I know the Lions visited with him at the NFL Combine, so he is in play. They have shown some interest, and they could be really interested in the other Ohio State pass rusher around later than JTT. Torrey Horton, a player that went back-to-back seasons with 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns at Colorado State, first team all Mountain West wide receiver and a punt returner 2 years running. He is incredibly productive as a wide receiver in this class, creates separation, has yak ability, has strong hands, great chemistry with his quarterback. And again, if he could come in and be a long-term option for that wide receiver 3 position in the third round, that is a fantastic player. He'd probably immediately be wide receiver 5 behind Tim Patrick and Khalif Raymond, but could very quickly grow into a wide receiver 3 role, especially when a guy like Tim Patrick is no longer on the roster next season. Dylan Fairchild, guard from Georgia, was brought in for a top 30 visit a few weeks ago. The Lions need offensive guard. He is a strong pass protector, good run defender, all around just a high floor type of guard. I think a player the Lions could be interested in at 102. Tez Johnson and Xavier Restrepo, 2 wide receivers that I think the Lions could be in on. Both are good separators. Both have good chemistry with their quarterbacks. Productive in their final years of college football. Tez Johnson is extremely undersized, which is concerning, but I still think somebody will take a shot on him. And if anybody's going to take a shot on a wide receiver that can separate really well, it's going to be the Detroit Lions. Orlando Gadsden, I believe is how you pronounce his name. The tight end from Syracuse was incredibly productive this year in that offense. Had nearly 1,000 receiving yards at the tight end position. He is big at 6'6", has great catch radius, is able to dig balls out from just really inopportune placement from his quarterback sometimes, and I think could be a really good receiving threat to pair with Sam Laporta. Deion Walker, again, had borderline first round hype a few months ago, has kind of fallen off, but at 6'7", with the power that he's displayed, has the opportunity to develop at the NFL level. His last season at Kentucky was a big downgrade from his sophomore campaign. But if you watch his sophomore campaign and you watch what he did as a second year player, he was really impressive. He had great power, good length, and I think could develop back into that. But with his regression in year three, obviously that is less likely to happen, and which is why he fell in the draft. Zy Alexander from LSU and Kobe Bryant from Kansas are both players in the secondary I think could be taken a look at. Both of them are good ball hawks. They take the football away. They are just have good ball skills. And I think that's something that the Detroit Lions secondary is in need of. They would obviously be cornerback 6 or 7. They'd be on special teams early, but adding that quality depth, adding that good high-end talent at the end of the third round to potentially kind of backload the secondary. And then, of course, when guys like Rocky Sin and Avonte Maddox are off contract, you can kind of put those guys in younger rookie contracts and feel comfortable of what the position they are playing. And then I have Jackson Slater, who I think could sneak into the third round, but is more likely a fourth round selection. Player from Sacramento State, very much a Brad Holmes guy. Good size, good pass protector, solid run blocker, small school player that we know they love to take a look at. If he falls to day 3, I think he is going to be the easy pick for the Detroit Lions. But even if not, if they don't feel comfortable, he'll be there with their fourth round selection. I could see him being at back end of the third round, top 102 type of player. And I think it'd be a decent value for him as well. Speaking of Jackson Slater, I have him at the top of my early day 3 board. I think, again, a very Brad Holmes type of player. Good run blocker, solid pass protector, good size, ideal length, and would immediately fill a position of need of depth. I think he'd immediately be the backup left guard, has some versatility from Sacramento State. Just overall a player I think would really, really benefit from a Detroit Lions coaching staff and a player that could develop into a long-term option at guard as well. Za Frazier from UTSA is a big 6'3", very athletic cornerback, good ball skills, good protection, a little bit raw in a very similar way to what Tyreek Woolen was when he was coming out of UTSA. Just a big athletic cornerback that could develop into something really special. A day 3, round 4 pick on that is well worth it in my opinion. Savion Jones, edge rusher from LSU, big guy, 6'6", 200, I want to say 80 pounds, a big player at the edge, super powerful at LSU, visited with the Detroit Lions at the NFL Combine, so the connection is there. Maxon Hook, safety from Toledo, really good ball hawk, great production when the ball is in the air. I think has really solid range for what he did in the MAC. Just overall, I think could be, again, if you miss on a guy like Malachi Moore, could be a good option for day 3. Won't go very early, but I think has special teams versatility early and potentially starting safety 3 reps as early as his rookie year. Could be a good value for the pick. Chase Lund from UConn, just a big, physical, really good, talented player from UConn, flying a little bit under the radar, but as a day 3 pick, could be a great backup option. Isaac Tesla, wide receiver from Arkansas, has visited with the Detroit Lions on a top 30 visit. Is not the biggest separator, but is a little bit more big, a little bit more physical with the ball in the air, so could be a player that's in play for them. K. Robinson from Alabama and Antoine Powell-Ryland from Virginia Tech. 2 edge rushers that I think are very different, right? Antoine Powell-Ryland was super productive at Virginia Tech, more of the traditional bendy edge rusher as opposed to a traditional defensive end, but the talent and the production is not to be denied. They are very talented players in their own right. K. Robinson at Alabama is a more prototypical 6'5", 245, had 4.5 sacks a season ago, wasn't really the biggest producer at Alabama, never really took that final step to be elite, but was a constant rotational threat at Alabama and is a player the Lions have brought in for a top 30 visit as well. So somebody to keep an eye on. Jet Kaiser from Notre Dame really held things down in the middle for their national championship defense. Ty Robinson, and Cody Lindenberg, I think, are just good, solid Big Ten players on the back end of the early day 3 section of the draft, right? Ty Robinson, defensive tackle from Nebraska, had good production, comes from a Big Ten school, I think is pretty good athletically for his upside. And then Cody Lindenberg, just a productive player at Minnesota. And again, if you're going to bet on linebackers, you're going to bet on, those big players to be successful. Get them from Iowa, get them from Minnesota. Those are the schools that develop consistently good players at those positions. And I think that Cody Lindenberg is a good player in his own right. Going into late day 3 with your 6th and 7th round selections, I think Kyle McCord is very much in play for the Detroit Lions. Reminds me a lot of the play style of Jared Goff, thriving in a play action system, thriving in a position where he can just get back, throw the ball, purely a pocket passing quarterback with a little bit of mobility, but nothing you're really going to game plan around or scheme into the system. I think he has a good deep ball. I think he's fairly accurate. I think he makes decent decisions. And again, I think he could be a high-end backup quarterback. Reminds me a lot of Daniel Jones, who was selected 6th overall in 2019. And again, that's going to off-put a lot of people because Daniel Jones wasn't very successful as a starter, but you're not drafting Kyle McCord to be a starter. You're drafting him to be a high-quality backup to push Hendon Hooker as a passer, and I think is a better scheme fit for Jared Goff if he were to come in than Hendon Hooker is. Hendon Hooker changes the entire game strategy, changes the entire scheme and what you want to do with your quarterback. Kyle McCord would not do that and would be a great one-to-one comparison for Jared Goff. Ricky White, super productive at UNLV, 1,500 yards 2 seasons ago. Very productive, good player, small school guy. But again, the Lions like those guys at the bottom of the draft. Ja Joyner, edge rusher from Minnesota. Productive guy, Big Ten player, good power. I think fits with the Detroit Lions scheme and prototype for the player. Just a kind of an underrated player, in my opinion, out of Minnesota. Taj Brooks, running back from Texas Tech, 1,500 yards in back-to-back seasons. Incredibly productive at the running back position for the Red Raiders. Explosiveness is, up there. I think he'd be a great replacement for Jahmyr Gibbs if he were to go down. We have a primary backup for David Montgomery with Sione Vaki and Craig Reynolds. We don't really have the home run hitter if Jahmyr Gibbs were to go down. And I think that Taj Brooks in the 7th round, in the 6th round, could be that type of player that you stash, maybe even on the practice squad, you stash as your 4th running back, but bring him in if there is a big injury, and I think that you could use him in really unique and fun ways. Ty Hamilton from Ohio State, underrated player at defensive tackle, as is Nazir Stackhouse from Georgia. 2 just really good, underrated defensive linemen, pass rushers more than run stoppers, but players that could fill out the depth of the Lions' defensive tackle room. Jeremiah Harris from Iowa, good ball hawking cornerback from Iowa. Again, just value for special teams in day 3 of the NFL draft. Cody Simon from Ohio State, super productive, as was Jackson Woodard from UNLV. Just special teams linebackers that could potentially develop into good players on the defense. And then Addison West, the, I believe, offensive guard from Western Michigan. All-American prospect, a player that was super impactful for Western Michigan on the left side of their offensive line. Could be this year's Christian Mahogany, a player that just falls in the NFL draft because of some weird concerns, because nobody really knows what to do with them. I think if the Lions take him, he could develop into a left guard of the future. And if not, just some really solid depth. So with that being said, that is my big board for the Detroit Lions. Round by round, pick by pick, scenario by scenario. That is my big board for the Lions. I think there's a lot of good players at positions of need. It is a good year to need edge rushers. It's a good year to need defensive tackles. It's a good year to need some depth wide receivers, some depth cornerbacks, some depth running backs. It is a good year to be where the Detroit Lions are. They can get a lot of talent both early and late in the NFL draft. And I think at positions of need in particular, it's a good year to be where the Lions are. So with that being said, let me know down in the comments below your opinions on the big board. What players would you add? What players would you remove? What players do you want to see the Detroit Lions draft? And leave a comment down below. Who is the biggest player you want to hear their name called for the Detroit Lions tomorrow night? Give me your biggest player. Give me your favorite player. And I'd be very curious to hear everyone's opinions in the comments down below. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.